Welcome to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, where we reverse engineer the success of fast-growing SaaS firms and explore strategies CMOs and CEOs are using to drive their businesses forward.
Welcome to SaaS Backwards, a podcast that helps SaaS CEOs and CMOs to accelerate growth and enhance profitability. Our guest today is Karen Budell, CMO at Totango plus Catalyst, two SaaS software companies that have teamed up to help their customers drive sustainable revenue through your customer base. Hey, Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ken, thanks so much for having me. Thrilled to be here today.
Yeah, it's going to be a great episode. But before we dig in, could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, Totango and Catalyst, and why you've joined forces?
Of course. Well, first, just to start off with a little bit about me, my career history follows a bit of a non-traditional path. I started as a journalist and made the transition over to marketing, all while working at the Chicago Tribune Company. So for those that know the world of journalism well, that's kind of going from the split of church and state where you don't like to mix your news and your ads. I kind of towed that line and made the transition right around the time that content marketing was really taking off and catching fire. I then moved to a small private content marketing agency as chief content officer, and we worked with a variety of customers across CPG companies. We worked with financial services, a little bit of tech. And after a couple of years doing that in my hometown of Chicago, I had the opportunity to move to California. And what do you do when you move to Northern California? You kind of fall into tech. So I have been a marketing leader in B2B SaaS companies for the past decade or so. And all of that led me to Totango in July of 22 as CMO. And today I speak to you as CMO of Totango plus Catalyst, because in February of 2024, two customer success software competitors teamed up. We saw how we could be better together and help our customers protect and grow revenue under management. So I'm thrilled to be along for this next chapter in our story.
That's great. And I think it's always an exciting proposition to put two companies together. And also it's a lot of your marketing muscles get exercised because you need to have a great narrative that people are going to want to sign up for.
100%. I like to think a little bit about my career journey and my own kind of story arc is really following change and leaning into roles and opportunities where companies are at a pivot point. I was working at the Chicago Tribune Company when social media bust onto the scene and you saw newsrooms trying to grapple with how to leverage platforms like Twitter, now X, or change the way that they reported on stories and were taking photos off in themselves with their cell phones and iPhones. So I was at that company at a really pivotal point in the industry. And then just being in tech the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of change, especially over the last 4 years since the pandemic. And so being at a company that's just gone through a merger and helping lead the organization through a unification effort, not only with our cultures coming together, but also the work that we're doing within product and R&D is just really exciting. And that's kind of what drives me when I seek my opportunities.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, something we didn't touch on when we met last. But I think for executives in marketing, we have to keep building our toolkit through experiences, right? And you have to look at the things you're going to agree to do as part of building your own viability and attractiveness in the market.
Definitely. Always looking to learn new skills, continuously learning is what drives me. And as you touched on, really should be driving a lot of marketers and leaders today, especially if we take a detour into the topic of AI, right? You've got to not only be able to be conversant in generative AI and what it is and how it works at a high level, but you have to be willing to experiment both yourself and with your teams. That's also a fun part of the job. Working through change really kind of puts you in that position of being a student all the time and learning from those around you. I love talking about generative AI in particular because of where I started my career journey. Had that come onto the scene when I was a new journalist, I have to be honest, I think it would have freaked me out. I would have been scared, where's my job security? But now I've learned to embrace it because there's nothing worse than staring at the blinking cursor on a document and trying to conjure up some inspiration. So learning how to craft really great prompts to get you started on a creative thread. It's a great brainstorming partner to start. It's a good editor and augmenter to your own ideas. And so I've really learned to embrace it. And I often do a lot of writing or editing around what it might prompt me to, but helps get you started. And more than that, helps you really remix and repurpose some of those great ideas and content assets for all the different channels and places where we need to get our message and stories out these days.
Yeah. And I think also it's sort of a yes and here. It's like we need to be within our organization practitioners that adapt and adopt to the new things as they come at us. But I think also if the marketing leadership is going to retain credibility and influence with the rest of the C-suite, we need to have foot forward kind of positioning on where these tools our colleagues are hearing about, where they fit and where they don't, so that we keep the confidence in our colleagues and the C-suite and board so that we can continue to do our jobs, right? So if we don't keep sharpening the saw, there's going to be a credibility issue with the organization at some point.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and you can't ignore it. I don't know if anyone has read the newest software buyers report from G2, but AI categories of software were growing the fastest across all markets. So just the fact that you see that proliferation of whether it's AI enhanced products or AI first, if you will, in the generative AI and content field, you can't ignore it. You have to learn about it, experiment with it, use it. And I will say the biggest challenge that I see personally within our own team and with other leaders I speak to is adoption is really a challenge. We're learning a new muscle. We have to figure out how to weave this into our workflow and then build up the habits over time. And so it takes practice as much as there are those benefits. If you don't find a way to weave it into your common workflow or find ways to create excitement about it within your team, it can wane just as quickly as we saw that big boom in Gen AI about a year plus ago. It's kind of leveled out a little bit. So staying on top of that experimentation, but also adoption and finding ways to celebrate quick wins, I think helps it take hold in the way that you work and the way that your teams work to experiment and see some pretty meaningful results over time.
Oh, totally. And if you have product management within the marketing group, then you have a real responsibility to become expert here. You need to use your imagination to see how the product might take different directions and evolve based on using AI. So pretty exciting place for marketing to be right now.
Definitely.
Let's talk a little bit about the go-to-market motion at Tatango when you started. And when we talked, we kind of went through a discussion about that it was a PLG motion in 2022, but the reality was it was more of an enterprise solution and remains so. So how hard of a transition is it to move to an enterprise motion? And any thoughts for CMOs and CROs out there about to do the same?
Sure. Well, I think the interesting nuance here is that Tatango, having been around for about 14 years or so, had been serving the enterprise for quite some time, and that made up a sizable portion of its customer base. But one of the things that we had found in the sales process was getting buyers exposed to the product and how easy it was to use and quickly see value was a real selling point. And so how could we expose that to more buyers at scale was the thesis behind opening up a PLG motion and creating a free trial and free product with some limits. So I would say that was, in some respects, I mean, you could argue this both ways, I guess, but I see that as an easier move. You were enterprise, you were opening up then this new motion through product-led growth. Whereas if you start with a PLG motion to individual users, to then scale up into enterprise where you're selling to a different buying committee often and trying to connect the dots across disparate users, it's much more challenging to swim upstream. So we got a lot of great learnings about the role that exposure to our product played in our motion. We doubled down on some free trial efforts and found how valuable that was. And then we realized that the way that the buyer's journey was shifting, the way the markets were shifting, it was more valuable for us to have an interactive tour, a different asset, if you will, on the website to complement our sales-led motion, because we're selling to enterprises. Again, we're talking to buying committees that have 8 to 11 folks involved across functions and the post-sale organization, oftentimes the CFO coming in to scrutinize that purchase. And so it wasn't easy, to be clear. It wasn't easy to make that transition. But I think because we had established ourselves within the enterprise, that shift to PLG and then back to sales-led was something that we were able to do a little bit more cleanly, if you will.
So I think to try and unpack that a little bit, it was always an enterprise solution, but the PLG and free trial tactics allowed you to proliferate the initial use. But was it married up to the enterprise sales process, or was it, hey, 5 people at IBM are using it, let's figure out what's going on there?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. We definitely saw, more SMBs and smaller end of the mid-market segment come in through that front door, if you will. But we did also see that there were folks on the buying committee that would sign up for the free product and bring that experience into their evaluation at the enterprise level. So it was an interesting mix. I don't have the data right in front of me, but we saw a good cohort of both of those use cases when you looked at our sales motion and our bookings.
As you seek to move from a PLG or free trial motion to a sales-led motion, was there any public pushback to, hey, what happened to the option to try free? Or was it really more of an internal alignment and accelerating the sales process once you shut down the PLG and free trial?
I hate to have to say it depends, but I think it depends on who your user and buyer is, on whether or not there's public pushback or real consternation around removing that free option. But ultimately, at the end of the day, because customer success software and the ability to manage a book of business and protect and grow your revenue under management is typically an enterprise situation and a solution, we didn't see that much concern. And we still are able to offer exposure to the product throughout our sales-led process. So we didn't see that pushback like some other solutions might. But you did touch on something which I think leaders can't underestimate, and go back to our earlier thread around change. To shift your motion is change management within your team. So making sure that you have alignment with your executive peers and that you're able to cascade down to your teams why you're doing this and what the intended outcome is so key. And you're going to have folks that have invested time and effort and have seen results of that product-led motion. They're going to be very attached to that for what they created and built and put in market. And so if you're going to make that change and that shift, you can't underestimate the impact that change will have on your individuals and your teams. So that is something that I think requires a lot of alignment, like I said, at the executive level, and understanding how to communicate and manage that change throughout your organization.
Yeah, I imagine there's also an implication down at the very kind of the tip of the spear where sales is involved, right? Because in a PLG motion, people call it like product-led sales, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
So they feel like they're helping people to use the product more effectively and ultimately to upgrade to a paid experience. Whereas in the enterprise sale, it's, you start by signing on the dotted line. So different set of expectations and skills, right?
And not only that, but you just made me think about the other big change that we saw in a PLG motion. Your marketing mix is different. The way that you're spending your budget's different. You're bringing in as many users as possible. We went from having tens of thousands of leads to much fewer coming in to feed that sales team. So it's a real shift in perception that you have to manage to go from this quantity to fewer, higher quality potential buyers when you shift that motion.
So a lot of expectation setting, especially around your KPIs that you're going to be managing to.
Exactly.
Maybe it's good to move on to another topic that we discussed before in our prep, which was paying around paid advertising. And it seems like a good segue from the kind of opportunity generation you were doing to what you needed to do. And maybe we should start by just looking at, like, strategically and tactically, was the advertising you needed to do very much different than what you had been doing for the PLG motion, and how so?
Yes. I mean, and look, I'm speaking as a former Googler here, spent 4 years at Google within the larger ads marketing division. And so I understand the benefits and the opportunities with a heavy paid ad strategy. And that worked really well for us when we were in a PLG motion, playing for the long tail. But imagine all of the keywords that you're investing in to bring in a high volume of buyers. And then think about that enterprise buying committee I mentioned. They're going to have a lot of different questions and a different altitude of information that they're looking for. And so it was a big strategic shift for us to shift our messaging, to shift our advertising, our marketing mix to support that buying motion for an enterprise committee. And making that switch was also challenging. I touched on the internal change that you have to manage, but also working with external partners. When you start an agreement or a relationship and you've got one strategy and you're very clear on target audience and the goals, and then you make a very big pivot, sometimes you need to look at who you have on your team and who you have extending your team and figure out, can they make the pivot with us, or are there other things that we need to change? And then couple that with the fact that advertising platforms have changed so much over the past handful of years. And then we're talking about the unknown changes and the implications of AI, and especially in a search environment. And I think we're all just looking at what is the role that paid plays. And it feels like the pendulum swung back again, and we're realizing the investment in ways of building up our brands and organic. And so I know that you've talked about that with previous guests on your podcast and Rand Fishkin, and we are coming full circle again. Everyone was all in on performance marketing and demand gen, and now we see that's a piece of it, but we can't take our eyes off the importance of building brand for the long term. And you're building that message to have a strong organic growth as well.
Yeah. In fact, we had the head of marketing for Pavilion on, Kathleen Booth, and she publicly talks about their ability to generate, I think it's 30% of their inbound opportunity off organic LinkedIn. So I think that supports the point that you're making here, and Rand in a couple of podcast appearances with us, and you as well here now, that paid has its place, but there's got to be, at least for part of your effort, a better way. And there are plenty of people that are going to be very hard to reach by paid means, as we've come to call things like search or advertising on LinkedIn. You know, it might be that you have to invest more in events and get in front of people, find other ways to get your high-level messaging for an enterprise sale in front of those people. Now, I guess when you talked about agencies, is there some kind of general advice you have for other CMOs as they're kind of wrestling with the value of their agency relationships with paid advertising? Is there something that you did, like a rubric you went through to try and understand the capabilities and ability to come on the journey with you? How did you evaluate that?
I think the thing that was tough for me and for us is going through some change and transformation. If you don't have the right skills in-house, then you have to have a different bar and an expectation for what role your agency is playing and what gap they're filling. Whereas if you have someone on your team that has some paid media expertise, a great digital marketer, and they can really work with and direct a paid agency on execution, I think that can be a great relationship. There was a point in my tenure where I didn't have that person in seat, and we were looking to change agency partners. And it made it really challenging when you're both hiring internally and looking for that external augmentation of your team. So I think you just have to really go into selection process of any agency, whether it's a creative agency, paid, content, what have you, with understanding where are you at your point in time and for your strategy, what goals are really driving the need to augment the team, where do you have strengths and where can you fill in gaps in the team with the strong agency partner, and have a brief. I love having a brief to kind of kick off a big initiative and ground myself and the team and the outside partner. It gives you something to look back at and say, are we all on the same page? Does this ring true? So that you can start off on a good foot. So I'm not sure if that answers your question well. I'll just say it's hard. And I know that selecting the right agency partner is something that is often a hot topic in CMO communities that I'm part of. So I don't know if we've really cracked the nut on this one yet.
Well, I like where you were taking the conversation, which is, I think you have to have a open, honest, transparent, empathetic approach to this. And so I think the best relationships that I've seen, and I've been doing the agency work for a long time, have been where people did say, hey, this is where we have a gap. We just don't have this capability. Or I've got a person in a marketing role that I'd love you to help us grow, where the agency is maybe going to make itself obsolete over a period of time, depending on the scale of things. So I think having a real good assessment of your own capability and what your needs are and for how long makes for really good agency relationships. I think, most of us in agency land recognize there is some kind of, it's not quite a term limit, but there's a limit of usefulness in an agency relationship sometimes. Sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's 15. But I think you have to be prepared for that kind of conversation. How do you help your clients grow so that they don't need you or they need different things over time? So I'd say coming at it, with an open book is probably the best part of this segment.
Definitely.
That's what I seek. And, honestly, to me, it's at least a yellow flag if a client can't share with me the reasons why they need what they need. I need to know what's actually happening.
You can't underestimate the impact of candor. It's something that I like to bring to my relationships personally and professionally, but I'm also proud to say that being candid is a value of our unified organization at Tango and Catalyst. And you can't bring two companies together in a merger without that openness, without that willingness to be honest and raw and work through the potential problems and solutions together. So I think it has a lot of value both internally or externally when seeking an agency partner.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears. We got a couple more things I want to get to. We've danced around or just set aside the stuff of marketing, that, as Latny Conant says, the ing of marketing, the stuff we build. And I'm wondering, for you at Tango plus Catalyst, what are the roles of written content, industry events, and proprietary events? How are you trying to impress and influence the buying committee using those things that we build?
There are so many questions that come up during the buying process. Well, first of all, if you look at any of the research out there, we know how much the buyer is doing on their own before they even engage in the sales process. So yes, we want to arm and enable our sales and frontline facing teams with great messaging and collateral and assets, but we also need to be putting that out there through the channels that our buyers are seeking on their own. And written content or being a speaker at an industry event or on a podcast like this has been increasingly more important because we commonly hear from the enterprise buyers, what thought leadership do you have? You can't underestimate the fact that people are not only coming to you to buy your product or your solution, but they're looking to buy guidance and your expertise as well. And so the best ways to put that out there, you touched on it. LinkedIn is fantastic. I'm thrilled that through this merger, we have Edward Chu as our co-CEO and the co-founder of Catalyst, who's got a loud voice on LinkedIn along with Kevin Chu. So we see the magic of sharing the thought leadership and thought-provoking topics on LinkedIn can do. We have our other executives like Chris Dishman, who leads our customer success and post-sale org, involved in industry organizations and speaking at partner events, talking about how do you build your post-sale organization for today to ensure that you are following through on the promise that sales is selling and you're helping get your customers to value quickly and recurring moments of value over the lifetime that they have with you. So being able to get that point of view out through events presence, whether that's partnering up with someone as a sponsor or a speaker and an earned slot or sometimes paid, or producing your own events to showcase your thought leadership, hopefully some new research or some customer voices alongside you. Those are some of the most meaningful ways that we're able to help answer questions our buyers have, get our point of view out there, and really help accelerate those sales cycles.
I totally agree with you. And the research bears that out. LinkedIn and Edelman do annual research and report on the value of thought leadership. And it's just consistently always, you get fewer competitors, you get asked to more deals that you might not have been included in. The unit of sale or, the annual contract value goes up. And hearing you say it, your prospects are asking you for your thought leadership. That's pretty concrete evidence that it matters.
Definitely. It's almost like you can't get to it fast enough in some respects, but To go back to my earlier comment on the value of generative AI, there is also this opportunity to think about, hey, we might know what our point of view is and what we're saying, but has everyone seen and heard it in the right format or story that might make sense for them? So having that core narrative, I think, is what needs to fuel your strong event presence, your written content, that whether it's a galvanizing brand story or it's that differentiated narrative. That to me is the most important thing to nail. And that feeds so many of those other touch points and formats. So you can remix it. You can have a customer voice, like bring that to life through their own use case. That's the fun of it. And I should probably stop talking, Ken, because former journalist, former content marketer, like this used to be my bread and butter and kind of day-to-day life. So I can get pretty passionate on this topic if we go too deep into it.
Well, I think you did just the right amount. So you've managed to strike a great balance. I have one last question, which I realize it might be a little soon to talk in too much detail, but you have these two very successful companies that have come together. And how are you thinking about change to the go-to-market strategy? I mean, are there any early learnings, like signposts you can see that you're on the right path as you're trying to figure out a revised go-to-market for these two firms? Because this is, I think, going to happen more and more. I think we'll see some more consolidation across the SaaS landscape. And there are going to be marketing leaders that have to navigate the same path. So any early signposts of success or caution that you can share?
Well, sure. I mean, in our case, Tatango and Catalyst were occasionally on the battlefield together and we'd be in a competitive deal cycle. So it was interesting when we came together and we had our first conversations across the executive team. There was a lot of open and honest conversation. Is there a there? And what makes this truly a 1 + 1 = 3? And then you start peeling back the onion and you get into things. And I'll just start from like the very bottom. It's like you're moving in with your partner for the first time and everyone brings their favorite pots and pans and their furniture and their artwork to the house. And you got two of everything at the end of the day in some respects. So, here you've got two tech stacks you've got to work through from a go-to-market perspective. Which CRM do you choose? Marketing automation platform. So there's all that you have to work through as well. And then in terms of strategy, which market were we really playing to? What market segment did this company or that company have a stronger toehold in? And where are the overlaps? And I will say one of the things that we did well that I would encourage other leaders to do, if you can, depending on if you're public or private, but we were able to get some early insights from talking to our customer groups on both sides, sharing early news in a pre-briefing confidentially. And we got some great learnings about their perceptions about both of the companies and where there were opportunities, where there were questions to address head on. And so I would say taking the time to go on that roadshow and get the feedback from the market, from our customers, from analysts was really helpful in crafting the story that we wanted to bring to market when we announced the merger earlier this year. In go-to-market strategy, things move fast in today's world, and you always have to have your ear to the ground. This is where, to Latany and Sydney Sloan and others that have really championed the chief market officer, you have to bring that point of view on the market and the evolving needs and point of view of your buyer into the executive team. And that go-to-market alignment has to happen from marketing to sales to CS and product. That's the GTM team today. So you have to be working together, sharing what's working and what's not, and being willing to put your one team GTM hat on at the end of the day to find the best path forward for everyone.
Hey, that is a perfect place to land our episode of SaaS Backwards. Karen Budell, thank you so much for being our guest today. If people want to learn more about Tatango and Catalyst, how can they do that? And how can they reach out to you?
Well, you can go visit us at tatango.com/successisrevenue. That gives you a great landing page to read about our story coming together. And you can find me on LinkedIn under Karen Budell.
That's wonderful. And if you want to reach me on LinkedIn, it's LinkedIn/in/Ken Lempit. And my demand generation agency for SaaS is Austin Lawrence Group. We're at austinlawrence.com. That's Lawrence with a W. And if you haven't subscribed to the SaaS Backwards podcast, please do so wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for a great episode.
Thanks so much for having me on today, Ken. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks for listening to the SaaS Backwards Podcast, brought to you by Austin Lawrence Group. We're a growth marketing agency that helps SaaS firms reduce churn, accelerate sales, and generate demand. Learn more about us at www.austinlawrence.com. You can email Ken Lempet at kl@austinlawrence.com about any SaaS marketing or customer retention subject. We hope you'll subscribe, and thanks again for listening.